Next curve.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me here today for this reThink webcast. And I'll be talking about our detrimental hype syndrome. And before I get started and answer the question of, well, what is that? I want to introduce you to Dr. Jeffrey Funk, who is actually kind of we've been friends for quite some time, actually, on LinkedIn, right? And why don't you take a opportunity to introduce yourself? And by the way, it's great to finally meet you. This is the first time we've actually interacted face to face, even though it's virtual. But I'm really looking forward to this discussion with you.
Okay, I've been involved with technology for over 40 years, starting with my bachelor's in physics. Then I worked in a semiconductor factory. Then I went and got my PhD at Carnegie Mellon, looking at robots and economics of robots. So I was a very big optimist then about robots, but it quickly became clear that they weren't going to happen as fast as we thought they would. And so actually a lot of the capabilities we see in robots now, we were talking about having them in 1990. Then I worked in some companies. I taught at Penn State before I went to Asia in 1990, in the 1990s. And so I was in Japan a long time. I was involved with the mobile internet there. I was involved with a service called, some of you may remember, iMode. So there was a few years there where Japan dominated the mobile internet scene. And this had followed some other successes in Japan. So I had been very optimistic about Japan in the 1980s and 1990s, but people lost interest in the iMode service, the Japanese mobile internet, particularly in 2007 when the iPhone came out. And but that was really kind of the last gasp of really successful technology from where I stand. I mean, you did have the iPad. And then I in 2007, was when I went to Singapore. I decided to move to Singapore and teach at National University of Singapore. And I started teaching a course in the economics of new technologies. And while I'm teaching the course, I start to realize that many of these technologies that are being hyped, well, they're not doing well. They're not getting better. All this nanotechnology, superconductors, and bioelectronics, they're just not getting better. They're not only not confusing, but the performance isn't getting better.
Right.
And so that began my journey of becoming pessimistic. And then by the mid 2010s, I realized all the startups were losing money. So those weren't doing so well. I also realized that Moore's law was slowing. So I gradually became this pessimist, and I saw, and I still see, a lot of the dialogue as hype. As every time something comes out, there's this big hullabaloo and everyone gets excited. And then 6 months, a year later, it dies off. You know, we look at AI and, it's been gone from IBM Watson to Jeffrey Hinton saying that radiologists will be gone by 2021, to self-driving vehicles, to the criminal justice system be completely remade, along with home flipping, and so I see these waves of hype that are going on.
Right. But you know what? There's some folks out there that are going to argue that hype has a role, and they'll associate it as a sort of an essential element to the process of innovation. I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, as a pessimist.
Well, the problem is that the exaggeration of many of these startups, of the capabilities of these startups and technologies, has caused rational thinking to go away. It has caused startups to not experiment, startups not to think, could we do it a different way? So an essential part of startup and innovation over the forever has been experimentation. You experiment, you try something, it doesn't work. You try something else, it doesn't work. But when you have this hype, there's no questioning the service. It's, it's going to succeed. No, it's going to succeed. So there's no experimentation. So you look at like all the ride sharing, you look at a lot of the startups, they all did the same thing. All over the world, all the ride sharing, all the food delivery, business software, telehealth, all these things, they all do the same thing. And the hype, you see, it used to be that 40 years ago, there'd be all this criticism right away. Oh, you're not making any money. You're not making any money. Okay. And then other people would say, okay, we're going to do this differently. But now it's kind of like, no, it doesn't matter if you don't make money, because Amazon didn't make money for a long time, so you don't have to either. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to change anything. You just keep growing, grow. That's it.
Grow. Yeah.
So this hype, combined with this obsession with growth, makes experimentation less. And experimentation is really the key. You have to experiment. Right. You have to try different things and tweak the service. Try different customers, try different designs.
Yeah. Right. So one of the things I try to do with the startups that I coach is like, we have like a little bug here. But anyway, it is to tell them, look, profitability is a constant test that you need to have against your idea. And the idea that you scale out something through investment, VC investment, that is not profitable is probably eventually going to turn into a less than it's going to result in an outcome that's probably not going to be a successful one, right? And so I think the pressure of having to deliver profitably is something that has been almost completely lost, because, like you said, the way that the VC culture has been set up these days is to pump capital into a lot of business ventures that fundamentally are not profitable. And I like that you brought up Amazon, because I did consulting way back in the day for these companies called .coms, right? And one flavor of these .coms were these e-commerce companies. And one of the things that we discovered going through actually this deep process of helping these companies build out their business models, right? Define how the stuff operates in the back end. You realize the front end, there's just literally physical limitations to scale that impede the possibility of profitability. And I think that's what we kind of are seeing now with a lot of the e-commerce ventures out there. They have proven not to be more profitable than their brick and mortar counterparts. So if we're to sit there and look at Walmart versus Amazon's retail side of the business, I don't know. I mean, Walmart is doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Well,
Amazon had $3 billion in cumulative losses at the peak, right before they became profitable in year 10. Now we're looking at startups that have been around a lot longer, for 10 years. Yeah. And you've got 17 unicorns, publicly traded unicorn startups in the US who have more than 3 billion cumulative losses. When I say cumulative losses, I mean the annual losses all added up. Ideally what you have is annual profits added up to get cumulative profits. Right. Here we have these cumulative losses. And there's a lot of these unicorn startups that are all outside the US are the same way. Kuaishou and things that they have more than 30 billion. So Uber has more than 30 billion in cumulative losses. So we've changed the standard. We've lowered the standard. We allow companies to get to incur very big losses. And we're not asking enough for startups. And it comes from the hype. It comes from the hype of people not challenging these startups and challenging these founders to really come up with something better.
Right. And so can you think of anything positive about hype? Can you say one nice thing about it?
Well, I mean, I agree. We need to have some kind of optimism. We have to realize that most startups are going to fail. Most technologies are going to fail. There's going to be a few that succeed. So we need to be looking for that 1%. So that requires us, maybe not to hype things, but it requires us to say, okay, some are going to lose money, but we have to wait for the good one. But the problem is that there isn't very many good ones. We've basically got
but that isn't
Airbnb, Moderna. That's about it.
That's more from a portfolio manager's perspective, right? You have capital that you have to allocate and put to work, and you're looking for bets. And but from the standpoint of a startup or a founder perspective, if there's genuine interest in developing and building a viable business, this question of profitability and the need to realize profitability as soon as possible, it seems to become less and less of a thing. There's more of an expectation that there will be funding to help scale something that has not proven itself to be profitable, hence viable. And that's where I've seen the problem in this practice, if you want to call it that, because this is what a lot of the whole startup and the VC community is basing their mindset on, and so I don't know what your reaction to that is, that statement or point of view.
Well, the VC industry has changed a lot over the past 30 years. Mm-hmm. And some of the big changes are the fees they collect. So a lot of the money they make is they make fees on the money they collect. And that so they have this incentive to just collect a lot of money, give out a lot of money, whether it's for something good, it doesn't matter. They've got to get that money out there to collect fees on it. Mm. And they've done very well at collecting fees. I mean, they're setting records for the amount of money they collect. So a lot of the problem is those individual investors out, pensions funds, who are foolishly giving all this money to these VCs. Mm-hmm. And the other way the VCs make money, of course, is by doing IPOs and by doing these SPACs. Yeah. And because of the foolishness of these retail investors, so the same people, a lot of the people who are giving money to VCs are also investing in public stock market, or they're kind of related, because they really are hyped up about all these things, and they think it's going to change the world. So there's some narrative that was created. Somehow all these people have been convinced that these technologies are so great. And so these VCs have been able to hype all these IPOs and make back money, mm-hmm. even though, because the stock price went up share prices for many of these publicly trading units went up so much during the pandemic in 2021. They just went up to huge levels by the end of 2021. And since then, they've come down. So every publicly traded unicorn I can find has gone down. The share price has gone down more than 50% from its peak. And most, like more than 90%, have gone down at least 90%, 80%, 90%. Yeah. It's a huge drop.
Right. And we've seen this in crypto as well, right? I know that you opine quite a bit on crypto and that whole culture. And, I distinguish crypto from blockchain. A lot of folks don't recall that blockchain, which is the technology, was hijacked by the crypto community, because after the first, or I would call it the second collapse, they had to have a pivot, and they went to blockchain. And so now we kind of bundle crypto together with blockchain, which is sort of unfortunate.
Well, there's always been a lot of hype in finance, and I go back to what Nobel laureate Roderick Schiller said about finance. Finance, its purpose is to make other parts of the economy work well. So its purpose is to allocate capital so that we have high manufacturing productivity, we have high service productivity, we have high agriculture productivity. So that's its purpose. So you look at crypto and you say, well, how is it making the economy work better?
Yeah.
It's not. And the problem with blockchain is that blockchain, the current form of it, it's not efficient enough. It requires just so many copies. I mean, this is what this transparency is about. It requires so many copies, and that just requires too much information processing, too much cost. So there's really no successful blockchain product. Now, it may change. It may be that they change it to some way to make it work, but so far it has not succeeded.
Right.
The IBM quitting in a recent service is just one more example.
Yeah, right. Trade Lens, which the writing on the wall was there at the beginning with that one. I mean, I did a lot of consulting in that field, and I saw a lot of red flags from the beginning. But here's the thing. So now we're seeing Ethereum make the shift to a proof of stake They even have a concept called proof of history. But I'm glad that you brought up this point, because there hasn't been a single crypto that has been based on proof of stake that has flourished. Many of them actually have died off. And so, it's really interesting, because the case the crypto community is trying to make is that moving to proof of stake is going to lower the whole, the energy consumption and requirements of, and eliminate that overhead due to mining, right? That's associated with proof of work. But, again, going back to, okay, that's fine, but does that lend to a viable construct for doing exactly what you mentioned? Can you use it as a currency, which you can't? It's just simply a proxy for fiat, at the moment. So there's no differentiation. So that's why I always ask the question, what's differentiated about this? Because if it's going to become the future of currency, then it has to be a complete substitute, which it's failed to do. So hey, so since we're on the topic of technology, I want to keep us here for a moment. Gartner, I used to work at Gartner. I was a managing partner there. And one of the things that I really loved, and I have to give a lot of credit to the folks at Gartner, is the hype cycle, right? And there's this part of the hype cycle, which is, sort of the, you have the trigger for the technology, and then you ride this hype cycle up to a peak of inflated expectations, and then you work your way down to the a trough of disillusionment, right? And I call that hump, that first hump, the hump of nonsense, right? But oddly, we continue, as these new technologies come in, whether it's generative AI or, in the past, like blockchain, what have you, we continue to ride up this hump of nonsense. What are some of your observations there, and why we continue to promote this behavior or embrace this behavior every single time?
Okay, I see a number of problems with the hype cycle. One is that it assumes that technologies always end up succeeding, but they don't. A lot of technologies, they come about and then they leave, and then they just never come back. Second, it assumes that there's one, second, there's a lot of times multiple humps, such as in AI. We've seen the IBM Watson failed. Then the Jeffrey Hinton's prediction about AI replacing all the radiologists, that failed. Then the self-driving vehicles have failed. Then we have criminal justice systems is supposed to be completely taken over by AI, used cars and home flipping. So we have these multiple humps. Then we've got the problem that basically the figure comes from the Dunning-Kruger cycle, where people who know more or know less think they know more. And so what it is it goes up because if people get a little information, they think they know a lot. And then finally get to the point and they realize, wait a minute, I don't know as much as I thought I did. Yeah. It goes way down.
Right.
Until it gets way down, and then people start to learn.
Yeah.
So, but Gartner never acknowledges that. They don't acknowledge that this is where it comes from. They just kind of say, well, this is the fact. And, they got to produce some data.
Right.
They got to produce some data.
I think it's just an observation of the dynamic of how hypes play out. I think, and you're absolutely right. The learning happens when you hit like a trough, and the hype is dispelled over time. And actually, the failures to deliver against those expectations is what you ends up teaching you. But then I think, going back to this idea of detrimental hype, as you come down that hype cycle, there's a lot of investment, effort, and and resources that go into trying to capitalize on those expectations or what is anticipated as an opportunity. But then that's when we see a lot of value destruction, right? And I think that's one thing that a lot of folks don't seem to tune into as we see these hypes start to really get descend down into this trough of disillusionment. And so if we were to sit there, why don't we talk about generative AI? I mean, because that's probably one of the latest examples of a hype that's probably going to go through the hump of nonsense.
Yeah. Well, actually, it already has. What people forget is that the term generative hype was used about 5-6 years ago for using AI to make engineers and architects more productive. So I was one of the people who got very interested in this back in 2015, 2016, looking at the ways that AI was being used. Now all that's forgotten. All the ways that it was supposed to be used have suddenly disappeared. 5 years ago, it was all over the news. I searched for it and I found all these articles, and it's all gone now. And now where it's replaced with this, we're going to, it can produce all these articles. Well, the first thing you have to realize about writing is that writing, there is no industries. There's very few industries that involve actual writing. It's not, we produce cars, we produce air conditioners, we produce agricultural products, we mine things, we give haircuts, we do a lot of things. Producing articles is a very small part of the economy. There's some news articles, there's books, but that's a very small part of the economy. I mean, you might say, okay, how about chatbots? Well, the Wall Street Journal just had an article a few days ago saying that the people who customer service people don't want these chatbots because they took the ones that work the technology 5 or 6 years ago and it didn't work very well, and they don't want to produce bad answers. They're going to make their customers angry, so they're being very careful. That's not going to work. And then you say, okay, let's use it for artists, but then you got it all trained on all these artists' information, so they're resisting, so there's lawsuits. So there's each of these things has problems. So what people need to do is think very carefully about how ChatGPT can make us more productive. What kind of software tool we're going to develop that fits in to the real job of engineers, of architects, of people, not just some general thing that's going to help us write articles, because that's not really the real economy.
Right.
Make the AI, fit the AI into helping people do their jobs. You gotta go much more detail. You need perhaps the AI asks you a lot of questions, and then it starts to give you answers, as opposed to just one thing, one question.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, and I think one of the dangers, and I've cited this a number of times actually over the last few weeks, is the trust that a lot of a lot of folks are putting into this technology based on a misunderstanding of its actual capabilities, right? And in all fairness to the folks at OpenAI, they even warned about this, but obviously it's been completely ignored, right? And I think one of the things that I think is very obvious that's happening is people are taking just certain examples, right, of and they may just be unique instances of where the AI has generated something that might look kind of, artistic, whether it's a picture that it generated but those tend to be exceptions. If you've ever really tinkered with this AI and tried to apply it, what you realize is that it lacks sensibility and judgment, right? It can produce something. But for instance, I asked it to produce some funky jazz music. It was some of the worst music I ever heard in I would never buy it. I would just go, dude, wow, that's horrible. If someone gave it to me and said, hey, I was plagiarizing the computer or the AI and was telling me this is my new song, I say, wow, you really kind of stink at music, you should get a different job, right? Or seek a different hobby or career. But again, I love what you were alluding to before. People will learn as they start to be disappointed by the technology, but then all that time, energy is spent on seeking applications that are not valuable, like what you're saying, right? These are not real jobs that are valuable, that contribute to the economy. And I think that, I mean, honestly, from this discussion, which is totally unscripted, that's a huge takeaway for me. So I knew I would get something out of you.
Well, it's a lot of it's about reliability. A lot of people don't understand reliability. They get in a driverless car and it works. They say, "Oh, they're fine."
Yeah.
Right. I worked in the semiconductors for defense applications back in the late 70s. And wow, we were so into failure rates because you were putting these semiconductors in satellites, and the satellites had to work for a lot of years, decades. Yeah. So they had to have very low failure rates. So you had to figure out how to test things to see if they were reliable to 99.99999%. You have to think about this reliability. You have to, but see, the inattention to these issues comes from hype. It comes from people just so excited about AI and so excited, and they knew that AI was going to succeed, and so something comes out, and immediately they say, "See. There's a lot of AI people who are desperate. They have to find something that works to keep their job. And a lot of the people in the tech industry, all these losses and things, people know it's a problem, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to admit there's a problem and try to come up with a solution. They want to gloss over it because they're afraid that the funding's going to go away. They're afraid that the jobs are going to go away. So they just keep hyping it. And a lot of them see this Chat GPT. I'm glad that Sam Altman is being a little more long-term. He's realizing that things might not work out as well as other people are saying. So he's saying, let's be a little more careful here, so that when there are problems, when websites produce content that's not very good with ChatGPT, that people don't suddenly give up. They say, okay, we'll wait a little. Don't. Because it does require more work. That's what Sam Altman said. So I'm glad to see he's being more careful than other people.
Yeah. And, what really I think is disturbing to me is that people continue to ignore it, and there's sources that continue to sustain an exaggerated narrative. And you see it everywhere. I mean, and to your point, I mean, you're giving a great example. You're probably giving a really good prediction of what's going to happen. Is you're going to see people actually disappoint folks about the technology. They'll set it up for disappointment, right? And in the worst case scenario, it'll do some tremendous harm, whether it's plagiarizing other people's content and harming them financially or what have you. There's a lot of avenues for unintended negative consequences that I don't think has been talked about enough. But I think that's always been sort of a part of the experience of disappointment that especially we've seen with cryptos, right? Because we have to be honest, there's a lot of people who lost a lot of money in crypto, and that's part of the damage, right? The harm that's done. And so that's why we're all looking at, now everyone wants regulation, right? Except for, of course, the crypto people. So, but before we close out here, and like I said, this is a really great conversation. My audiences really enjoy this because many of them follow you, and you're sort of this champion of sensibility. And I can appreciate that a lot because I see this happening all the time with a lot of my clients that and I find that when they subscribe to these hypes, it's really difficult to have a value conversation, right? Because usually my mantra is this: and I tell a lot of folks this, is if you have to subscribe to hype, that means you don't have a story to tell for your own company, your brand, and your products. And it tends to be the sad truth at the end, right? But My question for you is what were some of your thoughts on how we can get out of this cycle of hype and the detriment that's associated, the inevitable detriment that is associated with it? Any thoughts?
Well, you need to focus on the value to the user. You need to focus on whether you're being able to add more value, whether there's progress towards adding value. You can also look at that value in terms of productivity, in terms of how much value you're offering per labor hour. Is that getting better? Is the technology getting better? It's very important to focus on the technology getting better. A lot of people just assume, oh, these things get better. They read Clayton Christensen's book, or they heard about learning curves. Everything gets better. Well, things get better at different rates, and Moore's law was phenomenal. But that was an exception. Many of these technologies, like delivery drones or Starlink satellite service, you look at the performance that the user cares about, and it's not getting better. And that's what you need to focus on. Try to just focus on that value. So when I talked about AI, I talked about, well, does it make a worker more productive? Think back to when we had Microsoft Word or Excel or these kinds of things. They made workers more productive. In the same way, how is AI making a worker more productive? Don't think about, oh, it's going to replace all these people, it's going to change everything. Once they say, oh, it's going to change everything, then my eyes glaze over. And tell me exactly the story about how it's making somebody more productive, and then how it might make somebody else more productive, and so on.
Yeah.
Give the details of the narrative of how it's going to make things better, and focus on that. Don't be saying this thing's going to change everything.
Yeah, that's what were they doing? Like a few years ago, they're talking about disruption, and I'm a disruptor. We're a disruptive company. You heard it all the time, and you don't hear it as much anymore. But I think that mentality is still there, right? And I always say, hey, look, you're not disruptive until you've actually disrupted something. And most companies that are self-proclaimed disruptors, many of them are no longer here.
Think of computer-aided design.
Yeah,
that's had that's been very successful. But did it change everything? Did it enable us to introduce new mechanical products that weren't going to be introduced? Well, it's really hard to say, right? You might say, well, it allowed us not to make so many prototypes and things, but I really wouldn't say it changed everything. It changed things.
Yeah.
And even in electronic design, it helps us make these big chips that we couldn't make without it. So you got to think of some of these past examples, and they really help you understand the current ones, because those are success stories.
Right.
But they didn't change everything. It's not they changed some things, but not everything.
Yeah. No, that's very sage perspective and advice. And so, Dr. Funk, so great to meet you. And this was a really great conversation, very clarifying and insightful. I mean, I learned a lot from it, as I often do from a lot of your postings. And so to our audience, if you don't know Dr. Jeffrey Funk, you should follow him on LinkedIn. He posts quite a bit. And he posts very informative content. And he also has quite a following and a lot of engagement in the materials and points of view that he puts out there. And so check him out, and make sure to follow Next Curve at www.next-curve.com. Dr. Jeffrey Funk, thank you once again, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah,
it was very fun, and I'll definitely see you on LinkedIn.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Okay. Bye.